Up next, the first of two live viewer call-in programs looking at the latest from the Middle East. Our guest is Rabbi Meir Kahane, a former member of the Israeli Knesset.
Rabbi Meir Kahane, former member of the Israeli Knesset, what's your reaction to the announcement by Prime Minister Shamir that he would pull some troops from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, somewhat on the terms of the Camp David Accord?
I think that there's no question that this is the beginning of a retreat from those areas, and all those people who always said, well, Shamir and the Likud will, of course, never do that. Well, I also heard that said about Begin and the Sinai. I think it's a tragedy for Israel. I think that the voters of the Likud never expected this. And essentially, there really is, in the end, no basic difference between Shimon Peres and Shamir.
Put the current situation in the Middle East into perspective for us through your eyes and in looking ahead toward the new administration in this country.
I think that there's not the slightest doubt that there is heavy U.S. pressure upon Israel. I think that Shamir and the present government have accepted the fact that they will have to give in. I think that this will whet the appetite of the Arabs. I think that they sense that Israel is weak. It will not bring peace. It will only make things worse. And we are paying the price today for the terrible mistake in 1967 when Israel fought a war in which it was almost wiped out and won that war in 6 days and did not annex the territories. Those are our territories, and if they're not ours, then we shouldn't be there. And stop talking about them being liberated if you don't annex them. We should annex them because an Israel without that will be an Israel that faces a dagger in its heart. The PLO does not want peace. I don't trust them. People that began 4 wars with us does not want peace. They haven't gotten more peace-minded. They've gotten cleverer.
What's the bottom line with you? What do you do to take care of the Middle East problem?
You first of all begin to be honest. There won't be peace. If anyone ever gets on this show from Israel, whether from the left or the right, and says, I have a peace plan, throw him off the air. He's a demagogue. I want peace more than anyone else, than anyone who lives in Washington or in the States. I serve in the Army, and my children do. But there will not be peace there. The question is not peace, but whether Israel will survive. You annex the territories, you transfer the Arabs out, and I know that the world will be upset, and that's too bad. And then you have faith in God and a strong army. And that's the best that I can offer.
You have been, it has been quoted of accusing you as being extremist, controversial, even a racist. Are you a racist?
Of course not. But, you know, when people say, are you a racist, or what do you have to say to that? I don't have to answer every absurd, libelous comment. Defamation is the last refuge of non-thinkers. If you can't think, you call names. I'm not a racist. Why am I a racist? Any Arab who would become Jewish tomorrow is as Jewish as Meir Kahane. That isn't racism. What I'm talking about is a conflict between two peoples, each of whom believes that it is his country. When you speak about coexistence between Jews and Arabs, there isn't even coexistence today between Arabs and Arabs in Lebanon. And when people say I'm an extremist, well, one person's realist is the other person's extremist. I'm not an extremist. I think those people who see what is happening and don't do the things that I say have to be done quickly are the extremists.
Our guest tonight is Rabbi Meir Kahane. He is a former member of the Israeli Knesset, and he joins us to take your calls and comments. We'd invite you to join us, as you'll see the phone numbers at the bottom of your screen, and you can start dialing now. For the Eastern Central Time Zone, 202-628-2525. If you live in the Mountain or Pacific time zone, the phone number is 202-783-2727. We would also tell you that if you're watching us live on this Thursday night, we'll be joined in about 40 minutes with George Moses. He is president of the National Association of Arab Americans. Rabbi, you wrote in a piece that was published in the New York Times about a year ago now, there is a specter haunting Israel and its American Jewish supporters. It's called guilt. What did you mean?
We Jews, having lived for 100 years in an exile with no state of our own, and suffered all that we have suffered, have come to so much need to be loved that we feel guilty about everything, that whether we have done it or haven't done it. This guilt over the Palestinians. Guilt. Since 1920, they have attempted to murder Jews. This problem didn't begin in 1967. In 1929, the Arabs massacred 67 Jews in one day in Hebron. What was troubling them in 1929? The occupied lands of 1967? In 1947, they turned down the UN partition plan, which would have given them a state called Palestine, and a much larger state than it would have taken in more than the West Bank and Gaza. It would have taken much of what is now Israel. They said no. They went to war. They began 4 wars with us. And we feel guilty. The Palestinians would massacre us if they could. Now, if Jews feel guilty about shooting Arabs every single day, and if they feel guilty about beating up Arabs, then they should ask themselves, what is more humane? Doing what I say, transferring them out of the country into Jordan and letting them establish their own country there called Palestine, or doing what Israel is doing now? I have no guilt about saving Jews from a horror that the Arabs would bring on us. And yet there is this incredible guilt feeling that somehow we are doing things to an innocent people. They're not innocent. They never were, and unfortunately they never will be.
Born and raised in Brooklyn.
Yes, indeed.
When did you go to Israel?
1971.
And you recently have given up your American citizenship.
No, I say no. The State Department says yes. It's in the courts now.
And you have been quoted as saying that you think American Jews should move back to Israel. Is that correct? Is that a correct quote?
I'm an Orthodox rabbi. I'm not a politician. I'm a rabbi who's in politics. For me, everything that I say is Jewish law. It's Judaism. Judaism says that every Jew should live in the Holy Land. A special people, a chosen people in the chosen land. Yes, that's exactly what I say.
What happens now with this new administration? We talked a little bit about that before, but really what happens with George Bush as president in terms of your ideas and in terms of the U.S. relationship with Israel? Well,
there's no question that George Bush, just as the Arabs, senses that Israel is weaker, can be pressured. He will pressure Israel. There's no doubt about that. I think that Israel has to face a reality. It has to choose. Once upon a time, we were a people that believed in God, the Bible, and the burning bush, and now I would hope that we won't believe in George Bush.
You are no longer a member of the Knesset.
Unfortunately, I think I was the victim of an obscenity. I think that when a democratic country passes a law barring a party from running, that's obscene. What happens tomorrow if the Orthodox Jewish parties will suddenly, truly and honestly feel that atheist parties are a menace to Israel and bar them, or the right bars the left party, or the left bars the other? Where does it end? I was barred, despite the fact, or perhaps because of the fact, that the polls showed that I would have gotten at least 8 to 9 seats in this recent election. So I'm a former member of the Knesset who hopefully will be in the Knesset again.
And you still lead your party?
Oh, yes.
And it's called?
Kach.
And what does that mean?
It means thus, or this is the way.
And what are you trying to do with it now?
I'm trying to become Prime Minister. It's that simple, because I really and truly believe that the things that I say may be difficult to hear.